Welcome to the Zinnov Podcast. You are listening to our Business Resilience series, where we bring to you conversations with eminent industry stalwarts and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their insights on overcoming challenges and the mindset that helps them navigate through journeys of crisis resilience and growth.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Zinnov Podcast. I am Nitika Goel, CMO of Zinnov, and your host for today. Over the past few months, the entire healthcare industry has been put to the test by the global pandemic. In these trying times, technology has played a key role in helping the industry build a significant amount of resilience. And one such technology is artificial intelligence or AI. To help us gain perspective on how healthcare outcomes have been enhanced with AI and ML, I have with me Amit Phadnis, GE Officer and Chief Digital Officer at GE Healthcare. Amit leads GE's digital and AI strategy business, and he has more than 30 years of industry experience and holds more than 25 US patents. Amit, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Nitika. Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me to this podcast.
Great. So diving right in, AI is considered to be transformational for the healthcare industry. What has the role and impact of AI been during the COVID crisis?
That's a great question, Nitika. First of all, I would acknowledge and say, yes, absolutely. If there is one technology that is transforming healthcare, tremendously today and has a potential of, sort of transforming it even more going forward for the benefit of patient, it is AI. Now, COVID crisis has been very interesting. To be frank with you, one would have expected AI, ML to play a much larger role during this particular crisis. But the pandemic hit us at a rate that was totally unprecedented in this particular scenario. AI in general needs data and it needs ground truth on the data. So AI cannot by itself generate knowledge at least at this point in time. So essentially the way AI works is if you have good data from patients in the past and you have annotated ground truth on it, which means that you know exactly what the condition of the patient was and that condition was recorded, you can apply those data sets to actually train a model. And then, once you have trained the model sufficiently and validated it, when you apply a new data set, in the case of pandemic, unfortunately, when the pandemic hit, there were not many data sets that were available to train models to begin with, right? So it was not like COVID was detectable through AI right up front because nobody had trained a model because nobody had data around it. But over a period of last 2 months, there are several companies across the globe, and including, I would say, GE Healthcare, which has successfully sort of trained AI-based models for different modalities like X-ray, CT. We are actually at this point in time looking at developing a cross-modality model between X-ray and CT and lab information together, because now we have data sets available. And what we are finding is because of the availability of the data sets and our ability to build cross-modality models, the efficacy of these models in terms of its accuracy is increasing significantly. And I think, there are quite a few models that are available today, which are being already used in the care pathway, in both detection as well as treatment of the patients. And that will continue to improve going forward, as we go through this crisis over the next few months.
Absolutely.
So that's where we are with AI.
Thank you. That's a really interesting perspective. And now, like you mentioned, we now have a deluge of data. We are also able to make certain inferences from that data. So how do you really see the use cases? I know you did talk about it a little bit, but how do you see the use cases emerging in the near future?
Yes, actually, it's a very important question. See, the use cases are very dependent on the particular care pathway that countries are adopting. And when I say care pathways, what it essentially means is how, if there is a suspected COVID case, or if there is a, sort of confirmed COVID case, how is the particular health system actually treating that patient? What are the steps they follow, right? What do they do first? At what frequency? Do they repeat some procedures? And so on and so forth, right? So the care pathway is very, very important. In some countries, they first do a test, then they do X-ray. If required, they do a CT to understand the lung condition in this particular case, and then they put the patient on a particular treatment path, and they repeat some of the scans and so on and so forth, right? In some countries, they are actually leading with CT and a pathological test, right? So the care pathways actually differ from mostly between from one country to another country a little bit, and that determines how you actually use the AI models, right? Take the example of a cross-modality model. So let's say that we are developing a model using both X-ray and CT, right? Just to keep it simple. What you typically do is for the same patient, you need data sets for both X-ray as well as for CT. And you obviously need a ground truth to be annotated on both of those scans. You then train the model with both X-ray as well as CT in such a way that just think about this as an X-ray and a CT an X-ray superimposed on a CT, or a CT superimposed on an X-ray image, and you're training the model with that combined image. The advantage of this type of a model is that then once you're trained that model, you may apply it in a country or in a situation where CT is not that easily accessible. But since you have trained the model with both X-ray and CT images, when you apply an X-ray image, because the model has been trained with both X-ray and CT, it can be then used to say, for this particular patient, what would the CT artifacts look like on a CT image typically? So it is as good as taking a CT image itself. So you actually train the model so that when I now apply a X-ray, you can actually predict what the CT parameters could be, which can come in extremely handy, in situations where CT is not that easily accessible, for patients, right? So that's one example of care pathway. The second example is you may just do an X-ray based model and an X-ray based care pathway and a CT based care pathway. There are other combinations where we are combining the X-ray information with the lab information, right? And then combining those two parameters and generating the model so that it can be then used in that particular care pathway. So it's very dependent on the way the patient is actually treated.
Interesting. So obviously AI is going to start playing a more critical role in the pathways, right? So will it be AI companies that are entering the healthcare space, or is it going to be healthcare companies that are going to be focusing more on AI?
I think it can be both, right? It can definitely be both. I think what is important is, does the company have access to the right data sets, right? Depending on what type of model you're trying to generate. Are those data sets properly annotated with ground truth, and what is the quality of that ground truth? And then obviously, if you want to apply the AI model in different geographies, then you need to make sure that your model has been treated with a variety of data sets from different geographies, because what we are seeing typically is that depending on the genetic profile of patients, model developed with a particular data set from a particular country does not work very well. If you applied that same model to a totally new data set coming from a totally different country. Okay, so the variety of that data set is extremely important, both from a model build out perspective as well as from a validation standpoint. And then finally, any AI is useful if it is seamlessly integrated in a care pathway and in a clinical workflow, right? So if a company does all of these things right, it really doesn't matter, right? It could be a existing healthcare company which is trying to do this, or it may be a new startup which is trying to get into healthcare. But some of these considerations are extremely important. Availability of data, good ground truth on that data, and more importantly, variety of information or variety of data sets. And then, your ability to sort of seamlessly apply the AI model in a given clinical workflow, right? So all of those parameters would determine how successful this could be, right, for any company.
Got it. So, would you also say that the influence of AI and the way organizations are thinking about innovation and partnerships is changing in the current scenario?
Oh, absolutely. See, one of the things that has happened because of as a result of COVID across the globe, actually in many countries, is that because of social distancing norms and things like that, and because of the need to sort of protect healthcare workers, most of the health systems are trying to, do online consulting to the extent possible, right? So consider a care pathway for any particular disease. What we are seeing consistently, talking to a number of our customers in G Healthcare, is that a lot of them have said that now, over the last 2 months, they are doing far more online consults compared to what they were doing before. Just to give a couple of examples, one of the large health systems here in the US said that they used to do just 5 to 10 online consults every day. That number has gone up for them to about 3,000 online consults a single day, right? So every day they're doing 3,000 online consults successfully. And what they're realizing is that in a care pathway, about 80% of the care pathway they can execute remotely, right? Without really bringing in the patient. And then 20% of the care pathway, they may have to bring in the patient in a physical sort of hospital setting. Similarly, 80% of the total number of patients can also be treated through online consults. So that is having a significant implication in the way they're treating the patients. And this has a great amount of applicability as far as AI is concerned, because when you're doing an online consult, a lot of initial triaging, obviously, if you have regulatory clearances, both on the model as well as from a workflow perspective, can be obviously done through AI, right? A lot of reading can be done through AI. A lot of segmentation, quantification of images, measurements, all of that can be done through AI, and that sort of releases the burden from a radiologist perspective or from a clinician perspective to a large extent. But we've clearly seen significant trends in virtual hospitals and telemedicine, remote reads, remote sort of execution of care pathways through this pandemic. And the interesting thing is most of them are now saying, well, there are a lot of benefits here. And while the pendulum has swung quite a bit in one direction, 3,000, 4,000 online consults a day, post-COVID, people are not, they don't think that this will go back all the way to where it was before. So, most of our customers are saying they expect 60 to 65% of the care pathways to be still executed remotely and in a virtual fashion going forward. So there's a significant impact on and change in the way care is delivered in the health systems.
Great. That's really interesting information. The other thing you talked about is, right, you said regulatory clearances at some point. Regulations and data privacy has always been a key hurdle in the healthcare space. Will AI or technology play any role in solving for this challenge, you believe?
Well, actually, that's an interesting question because first of all, I think the regulations are necessary. You're dealing with patients, you're dealing with human beings. Mistakes you make there can have significant implications on patients, right? So there are regulations for good reason, and they're really important. Okay. There are lots of regulatory changes that are happening because of the pandemic too, by the way, right? So, for example, in the US, now there are quite a few reimbursements which are possible on online consults. Or, for example, you could actually extend care outside of your state because you're now virtual, and so on and so forth, and that's allowed. There are quite a few emergency, sort of use cases that have been approved, at least temporarily, by FDA in many different sort of care settings, essentially. Now, your question is, can AI help, resolve some of the regulatory issues? And that, I think, is a very interesting question. We haven't really looked at AI from that perspective. What FDA has been working with a number of companies across the globe is to sort of get a perspective around how they need to look at regulations for AI, right? How do you make sure that you frame the regulations for AI in an appropriate fashion, so that while we encourage innovation to go at a faster pace, we also protect both patients as well as the health systems from the way it gets applied, right? From an outcome perspective. So I think that's where there has been a lot of work that has been done. Now, to your point, we could sort of think about a scenario where you're actually using AI behind the scenes, to sort of judge whether we are staying within a certain sort of regulation as defined by FDA, and FDA could use that in the background, right? Based on the data that they get and so on and so forth. But that's a really interesting question. I'm not sure how potentially this could pan out from a application of AI in the regulation itself, rather than the other way around, which is what regulations are going to be relevant, if you want to do AI-based innovation in healthcare going forward.
Got it. So I'm glad we've given you another perspective to think. Thank you so much, Amit, for joining us. Just to summarize, you said good ground truths, annotated from data, diversity of data sets, understanding workflows and care pathways in the case of the healthcare space, and obviously also understanding the value of regulation and also the regulations around AI when we're looking at the healthcare value chain. Thank you once again for your time, and thank you to all our listeners for listening in.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Zinnov's Business Resilience series. Stay tuned for more such interesting episodes and subscribe to our podcast on Google Podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. To know more about Zinnov, and if you believe we can help with your problems, please visit our website www.zinnov.com or drop us a note at info@zinnov.com. Thank you again, and don't forget to tune in to our next episode.